So I just saw Wonder Woman 1984, and it was a bit of a mixed bag. There was a good amount of both positives and negatives when it came to this film, and I have a lot to talk about. When it comes to the first movie, I really liked that first movie. I think Diana's journey throughout that film is very well done. I kind of like how she goes from being very naive about this world and thinking, oh, everyone must be good and all the bad is just caused by this god, and then becoming more aware that evil does exist in this world, but also being able to look past that and seeing the good that exists in everything and being able to move past the evil because of it. And I think her relationship with Steve Trevor also worked very well and also helped to move that message forward. I really liked her relationship with all the other minor characters in the movie, and I thought it was just overall a very well put together and structured movie. I don't even hate the third act. I know it's not the greatest thing ever. It is kind of generic, but I still think it works well enough in the movie, and they implemented the message decently enough into that third act. But overall, just really liked that first movie. So I was excited to get to see a sequel from this. And overall, I do think it's kind of a balancing act when it comes to the sequel. Although there is a lot of positive aspects I find with this movie, it also has to deal with a bunch of negative aspects that I do think eventually balance out to me thinking this is a good movie, but with some serious flaws. So starting with some of the flaws, some of the visual effects in this movie are downright terrible and inexcusable for a $200 million blockbuster. Especially with some of the green screen in this movie of Diana swinging around, just looks downright terrible. And in this day and age, you really only have two things that you can use to excuse bad CGI, which is you didn't have enough time, you didn't have enough money. And you clearly had enough money with a $200 million budget. And with all these pushbacks for this movie, you clearly had enough time to finish the visual effects. So I don't get why they look this bad at certain points. Also, I found Hans Zimmer's score quite underwhelming. None of his new music really thrills me or was really memorable. And some of the music he brings back is just stuff from his old score that has no thematic resonance with Wonder Woman. Like, I remember hearing some of the music in the third act. I was like, wow, this is actually very emotional and intense. And I'm like, wait a minute. This is from Batman v Superman. This is the music they play when the Waynes are getting murdered and during the infamous Martha scene. So what I'm guessing is he's like, oh, I have to write something emotional and intense for the scene. I'll just take something that I already wrote. And I'm like, really? You were too lazy to freaking write new music for this? Like, they do bring back Wonder Woman's, like, very memorable and very popular theme, but they don't use the electric version from Batman v Superman or Wonder Woman. They use the more orchestral version that we heard in Justice League. And I'm like, this is way less intense and exciting. Why would you go with this version? Also, I think the pacing can be very uneven and not flow super well at times. And I think maybe this movie could have gone with one more wave of editing to make it a bit tighter. Also, I think it can be a bit much at time, like a bit too cheesy, especially when we open up in the 80s. Like, I don't have a problem with the flashback opening with the Amazons, but when we first go to the 80s, it's way too much. And I was like, oh dear, are we going to have to deal with this the whole movie? Because it's literally just everyone going as big as possible and her literally winking at the audience. And it just wasn't working for me. And I'm like, oh dear, I'm going to have to deal with a whole movie of this. Thankfully, it gets better as it goes along. So if you are watching this movie and you feel that, don't worry. It's not going to be that the whole movie. Also, I say the action is nothing great. Like, I thought the action was done very well in that first Wonder Woman movie, and I just didn't feel that kind of intensity or style to it that we got with that first one. It feels very forgettable, and it doesn't help. The visual effects aren't really helping them that much out in that department. But moving on to the positives, I really like all the main characters in this movie and kind of the journey and arcs that they get throughout this movie, especially how it all centers around this magic stone, which at first I thought was just kind of this lame MacGuffin that was just going to be forcibly used to bring Chris Pine back. But thankfully, they're a bit more smart with that. I think the stone is very cleverly implemented into the main message of this movie. You can't just simply take the easy way out and make the world what we want it to be. Sometimes we just have to accept certain things and be able to overcome them the harder way. And I think that is very well implemented in bringing back Steve Trevor, which at first I thought, like, going into this movie, that they were going to just bring him back in some inconsequential way just to have him back. And it's just going to be like Kingsman 2 again, where, oh, Colin Firth, we got a magic Joe that freaking cures bullets to the head, and now he's back, and that's it. But no, I think they very cleverly implemented bringing him back into the message of this story and having actual consequences for him coming back. And the fact that also it was not a permanent thing and it's something that Diana has to finally let go of. Unlike the first film, she actually has to make the choice to give him up. And it's very interesting to see her kind of delve with that because she's been alone for so long because all the people, all her friends from the first movie are long dead now that it's the 1980s. And she's just been alone and has nothing else. But finally, she gets Steve back, and seeing her have to deal with that, I thought was very interesting. Also, the way they implement the message with the villains is very well done. I think Pedro Pascal and Kristen Wiig did a really great job in this. I was really worried they were going way too big, like in the beginning of this film, like I was with a lot of stuff. But I think as it was able to go along and get fleshed out a bit more, I think they did a really good job of making you understand where they were coming from and being a bit more sympathetic with them while still letting them go big and kind of be these like villains. I think Pedro Pascal especially really carries the character of Maxwell Lord on how this power is literally destroying him both physically and mentally, but he's refusing to give it up because it's everything that he's ever wanted. And the fact that he's been like kind of brought down as this loser his entire life, he finally has this power to rise himself up above everybody else. I think was a very interesting direction to take this character. Now, Kristen Wiig as Cheetah I don't think works quite as well, but I still think works to an extent to help show kind of the antithesis of Wonder Woman and what happens when you kind of don't take heed to the message of the story and kind of just engulfed in taking advantage of the easy way out and just achieving what you want instantly. I will say her design could be a bit better, both her human cheetah print costume and her CGI actual cheetah look wasn't the best looking design they could have gone with, but at the same time it didn't ruin her character at all for me. But overall, despite some serious flaws with this movie that I think keep it from becoming like a really good movie, I still think this is a very good entertaining movie. I'd definitely recommend it to anyone kind of on the fence about going to see it. So check it out and decide for yourself. So, Danny, I'm wondering, what did you think of Wonder Woman 1984?
You make all these superhero movies with women, and none of them flash their headlights. That's not real. Everybody's got to take a shower.
So you thought the freaking superhero movie that's meant for families needed more nudity in it?
I'd like to see some boobs.
But, Danny, don't you think the purpose of Wonder Woman is meant to show a strong and independent and inspiring woman?
Yeah, and they're strong, big, and they press up against the glass, you know.
Any other thoughts about the movie?
No,